Despite my existence as a Zoomer who was born 3 years after the PS2 released, I've grown an appreciation for old school games, especially those from the late 90s. I'm sure we're all familiar with Sonic Adventure, Metal Gear Solid, Marvel vs. Capcom 1, Banjo-Kazooie, and Tekken 3. But for today's video, I wanted to highlight a lesser-known work that was also released in 1998. Developed by a mysterious Japanese game studio, Daraku Tenshi The Fallen Angels is a cult classic fighter known for its bleak and grounded aesthetic. What separates Daraku Tenshi from most games I cover, and most fighting games in general, is its frantic development cycle. I'll cover this in more detail later, but what you need to know for now is that there were a lot, and I mean a lot, of ideas that never found their way into the final product, with various pages online dedicated to archiving them in all of their glory. Before we continue, I need to thank suddendesu.net, the Cutting Room Floor, Unseen64, and the fan-made Daraku Tenshi Discord server, especially user Kombucha Mushroom Person, for their assistance when I was creating this video. Get ready to jump into a condemned wasteland, dear viewer, as we explore the world of Daraku Tenshi The Fallen Angels. The year is 1996. And after working on various titles for SNK, one Mitsuo Kodama is about to receive the opportunity of a lifetime. The opportunity to direct his own original game alongside some of his closest companions. Going under the name of Steel Hearts and utilizing prior experience within the fighting game genre, development began on The Fallen Angels, their new IP. It's important to note that, like with other small-scale Japanese studios during the 90s, Steel Hearts was more of a collective of friends rather than a corporate entity. The closest comparisons I can make are the late Kenji Ino's Warp Studio or Goichi Suda's Grasshopper Manufacture, where they care more about artistic merit and innovation over profit. These studios may have been short in staff and capital, but never in inspiration, which they unabashedly channeled into their works. I think the most important thing when creating a work is heart. If you have enthusiasm and passion, you will naturally see the means to achieve your goals. All that's left is to keep putting in the effort, so conversely, if you can't see the means, maybe you lack enthusiasm and passion. After being personally affected by 1995's Great Hanshin earthquake, Kodama and a few colleagues huddled together in a rundown office building somewhere near Osaka's Nishinakajima Minamigata rail line, where a new idea was about to be born. Set in a dystopian future where technology is God, February 10th, 2000 marks the day when a lethal natural disaster ravages through an unnamed city, completely destroying any order it may have had. The city, ironically known as Eden, has now become a hotbed of vice, attracting the derelicts and rejects of society to its unspeakable evil. 10 years later, and a new group of so-called fallen angels have turned Eden into their stomping ground, stopping at nothing to get to the bottom of it all. Within its gallery of 8 outcasts, Steel Hearts wanted to demonstrate realism by avoiding flashy special moves and fantastical character designs, instead focusing more on the bleakness of humanity after a tragedy. Amnesiac android Taro, for example, was initially named Chanko, after chankanabe, the type of food that sumo wrestlers eat, and his appearance was meant to be sad but cute, whereas Roche was groomed as a child to be an assassin, simply not knowing any better due to his conditioning. Unlike most fighting games that feature an army of cheery background characters, Daraku Tenshi's locales are noticeably quiet, building on its lonely atmosphere. Fights take place in and around abandoned restaurants, fields, junkyards, and even cemeteries, mirroring the kinds of locations you would see when exploring the outside world. In order to secure a publishing contract and external funding, Kodama used his connections at Saikyo, a studio once known for shoot-'em-up games, to get them on board. This proved to be a success, with the two groups being credited on Daraku Tenshi. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, however, as Steel Hearts had less than 12 months to finish the game. They had to create characters, battle mechanics, audio, visual effects, and stages, in addition to all the necessary programming work that takes place under the hood, in under a year. Kodama explains online that Steel Hearts had next to no money or status within Japan's growing game industry, but the genuine bond shared between its members was what kept them going. The game's sub-boss, Trigger, was designed by an old friend of Kodama's from his teenage years, with their friendship leading to a realized character. The plan was for every fighter to possess their own narratives within Eden, and numerous storyboards were created to flesh out their story beats. Over time, their paths would converge, leading to conflict if they failed to see eye to eye. These storyboards are filled with detailed cinematography and dialogue, indicating that Steelhearts had major ambitions for the story they wanted to tell. Early concept art found within Daraku Tenshi's ROM highlights its fighters in a cruder art style, one where ideas hadn't been made final yet. Interestingly, Taro was planned to be human, with his love for animals being present within his piece. Even if they didn't realize it, the developers were creating what could have been the most story-focused fighting game of the 90s. Instead of going the usual route, where characters only have specialized endings, an entire universe of blurred morality and complex emotions was being drafted, with these figures each having their own story to tell. Kodama and his team were confident that come hell or high water, their extensive concepts would come to life within Japanese arcades the following year. Creating such a mature and realistic, bleak tone for a fighting game wasn't commonplace within the industry, but I believe it stemmed from Japan's economic stagnation. Known as the Lost Decade, the country's banks, stock market, and overall GDP were crashing hard, resulting in wide-scale financial instability. Steelhearts may have lacked job security or high wages, but they at least had total creative control over their body of work, and for a group of artists, that's the most important detail. At least, that's what I wish had happened. In reality, Daraku Tenshi was rushed out the door against the creator's will in 1998, but from an audience's perspective, it was yet another fighting game to play. By this time, the genre's technological advancements meant that fighting games had never been more advanced, with Daraku Tenshi standing solely on its own against an ocean's worth of competition. With that said, let's explore its systems. Stemming from Kodama's past experiences at SNK, Daraku Tenshi is a 4-button fighter with 2 punches and 2 kicks. Taunting, charging meter, rolling, and stance switches are all universal mechanics, along with the general meter and guard bars. By building meter, you enter max mode, allowing you to perform supers and guard cancels, as well as receiving general frame data improvements. Aerial movement plays a large role in neutral, as every fighter has 2 sets of jumping strikes. Attacking during the upwards portion of your jump animation leads to a rising normal, whereas descending attacks lead to falling normals. There's no landing recovery on air actions either, and with how consistent anti-airs aren't commonplace within Eden, a lot of ground can be gained by taking to the skies. Super jumps exist too, but they don't lead to extra height. Instead, they boost your horizontal jump distance, meaning they can be reacted to normally. For those experienced with 2D fighting games, and especially the King of Fighters, Daraku Tenshi will feel quite natural, as its basic control scheme and meter systems are fairly intuitive, but the same can't be said for its cancel system. Forget what you know about moves literally cancelling into each other in other titles, as there's a very unique and sometimes confusing system put into place here. When cancelling a normal into a special, for example, the recovery animation of the initial strike is sped up to allow for follow-ups to connect. Remember what I said earlier about Daraku Tenshi's grounded tone? Well, this mechanic was introduced to bring that realism to the forefront via gameplay instead of having it remain as a passive aesthetic. You'll instantly notice just how alien the cancelling system is within 5 minutes of playing, and when you realize that there's no combo counter, figuring out if your routes are true can be a real enigma. It's hard to put into words, but when you actually start playing Daraku Tenshi for yourself, it feels kind of surreal. It's not like there are no basic fighting game conventions here, but the general game feel and tsunami of glitches, unintentional behaviors, and programming quirks are like nothing else I've ever played. One such behavior that the Daraku Tenshi Discord requested I mention are command grab animation cancels. Harry, for example, has a powerful command grab that slams the enemy into the ground, but if you whiff the move in neutral, there's no whiff animation, he simply performs his heavy punch. This means he can do a normal, cancel into the command grab to make it whiff, thereby speeding up the recovery animation, and then do another normal. Basically, cancelling normals into moves that intentionally fail to connect leads to otherwise impossible combos. Making things more complex are the unique characteristics of each fighter, and although there aren't many of them, they vary significantly in gameplay functionality and appearance. In an interesting move, all 8 characters fail to cleanly fit into pre-established fighting game character archetypes, and many of them lack projectiles. Cool is my favourite example, as although he's a charge character, he's more about using pokes and pressure tools to control the mid-range space. Haiji can use plus on block buttons and high damage combos to bully the enemy, Yuri Ren uses a run to stay up close and personal, Harry is a grappler with access to a missile launcher that can permanently run out of ammo, Taro is a wrecker character who loves the mid-range, and Roche is a mix-up demon, just to list some examples. When taking Daraku Tenshi's tight deadline and small budget into consideration, its satisfying gameplay loop is nothing short of a miracle, with high-level Japanese players demonstrating just how exciting it can be when played to near perfection. With that said, what we received in the final product was but a fraction of what was originally planned, with Steel Hearts being forced to scrap countless major ideas. When compared to other fighting games released around the same time, Daraku Tenshi feels profoundly empty. The intro movie has no audio, character win quotes seemingly come out of nowhere, and there are no individual story arcs present in the arcade mode. Upon defeating the final boss, the game just hard cuts to a basic credits display, with the aforementioned storyboard concepts never making their way into the final game. As such, the game's narrative and character roster are noticeably weaker than its contemporaries, but Steel Hearts never meant for it to be this way. Contained within the ROM's bitmap data are multiple images depicting unused cutscenes and fighter designs, further adding to the mystery. Jimmy, Lapis, Sid, and Snake are the 4 scrapped playable characters, with Steel Hearts member Hajime Ito writing a now archived blog post explaining his thoughts on their capabilities. The characters I'm introducing here range from supporting characters to main characters. I'm so nostalgic, I'm in tears. When I first saw Lapis, I couldn't help but scream, "That's unfair," in my mind at the sheer reach of her character. When I saw Jimmy, I was so shocked that I almost became anemic. This is because he was the first fully naked character in the industry. Someone even said, "Wow, that's cool, this will be popular." Sid and Snake were also pretty good. It's a shame that a ghost appeared, such wonderful characters. "We really need Muay Thai," said Sid's representative. As for Snake, I don't really remember, sorry. Along with the 8 fighters that appeared in the final product, these 4 tied into the game's narrative and character relationships, with Snake being a henchman of the final boss and Jimmy being a relative of Yuri-Ren. On the topic of the final boss, Carlos, his involvement in unethical human experiments was slated to play a large role within Daraku Tenshi's plot. Jimmy's nakedness and lack of genitalia is a direct result of being experimented on. Concept art depicting the 2 characters reads, "Hi, I'm Otani. Right one is Carlos and the left one is the character who was deleted by mistake, Jimmy. If I had more power, you wouldn't be deleted. Sorry, Jimmy." With stylized art depicting something known as the Ash Children Project being hidden in the game's files. The only remnant of this in the final game is Taro's last win quote. Carlos appears within Haiji and cool story sequences, even being taken hostage at one point, implying that all of the fallen angels had a vendetta against him. Jimmy's older sister Maya, Mafia Don and Roche's boss Don Corneo, and a training camp near San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge taken from Onigawara's ending can also be found within the bitmap data, meaning that side characters and entire locations were omitted too. As the curtains begin to fall on an arcade mode run, Trigger and Carlos will stand in your way, and despite their seemingly complete nature, it's never possible to select them normally. However, hacking the game reveals that they're more or less complete, aside from some sprite glitches when you enter reverse stance. If Steel Hearts had more development time, every one of these concepts would have proudly made their way into the final build, but there also exists graphical data created solely for testing purposes. Early titles for Daraku Tenshi include Rubbin' Out, A Blow for Freedom, and Gut Reaction. The identity of the developer who created these is unknown, but I suspect it was Kodama throwing ideas at the wall to see what stuck. It's normal for video games to experience cut content as development progresses, but Daraku Tenshi stands apart from the others for a singular reason. The developers wanted to keep these in, but the publisher didn't. As mentioned earlier, Saikyo wanted Daraku Tenshi out the door as quickly as possible, and didn't allow Steel Hearts enough time to fully conceptualize their ideas. But that begs the question, why? Unfortunately, answering this is much harder than it seems. By researching Daraku Tenshi online, we find countless articles confirming that it was indeed rushed out, but none of them provide reasoning as to why this occurred. Fortunately, I was able to track down a very important source that explained the logistics behind such a decision, and they explained that Kodama failed to meet the expectations set by Saikyo. Now you might be wondering about who could possibly speak about the man's skill set and failure to deliver and be credible enough for me to trust them. Well, my source was Kodama himself. For the past month or so, I've been in frequent contact with Mitsuo Kodama via Twitter and have been asking him numerous questions about Daraku Tenshi. Members of its dedicated Discord server and I brainstormed what we could ask him online, and much to my surprise, we received replies extremely quickly. Kodama is one of the most timely and direct people I've ever interacted with online, playing a large role in unearthing never-before-heard information. For instance, The Nightmare Before Christmas, The Hands of Death, and Akira were key inspirations behind the game's art style. Developing the game was, quote, a reckless challenge, unquote, that was still somehow fun to experience, and the game's graphics were created with emerging 3D CG technology that had just hit the industry. Normally, breaking through the language barrier and receiving critical information would be cause for celebration, but Kodama's answers have this air of sadness surrounding them. He clearly feels regret about not being able to do right by his companions, with numerous stories existing online detailing how he was reduced to tears upon seeing the game in public, and Kodama personally told me that he was despairing when Daraku Tenshi released. Since then, he's been working on some of the biggest titles to come out of the Japanese games industry in recent memory, as well as working as a lecturer to coach students interested in becoming game developers, but there's still a special place in his heart for the Fallen Angels. The game I have the deepest feelings for is Fallen Angel. The development period was short and we weren't able to secure enough staff, so I'm not entirely satisfied with the quality, but I was able to spend a fulfilling time with the best team members. Some of the staff have now split up, but when I hear rumors that each of them is doing well, it gives me energy and makes me want to keep working hard and not give up. As a result of burnout, sorrow, and unsatisfied demands, the entire Steelhearts team disbanded after Daraku Tenshi released unfinished. Some members fled back to SNK, and if you thought Haiji and Harry looked somewhat familiar, it's actually because they inspired K-Dash and Maxima in The King of Fighters. Saikyo 2 went out of business in the early 2000s, with their final work being a mahjong game based on G-Taste, an erotic manga series. In a similar vein to how the group, as well as Kodama's joy of working on the game, was quickly snuffed out, a complete version of Daraku Tenshi was announced for modern systems and arcades in 2019. This re-release was slated to finish the game in its entirety, adding in the scrapped narrative sequences and playable characters, but for reasons never made public, it's been stuck in development hell. I doubt that the complete edition will ever be released going forward, but who knows at this point. I've researched plenty of fighting games before for my previous videos, but none of their stories resonated with me in the way that Daraku Tenshi's did. Kodama doesn't come across as some sort of rockstar game developer with a larger-than-life personality. Instead, he's just a normal guy, a realist, a victim of poor circumstances. What started off as one of my normal videos quickly turned into what you just witnessed as I went along. Writing, researching, and conversing with community members / Kodama himself was an eye-opening experience, and it inspired me to make this video grander in scale than my normal output. Before the story concludes, I would like to once again thank all the players and websites I consulted with for their patience and assistance. They each inspired me to make this production the best that it could be, and looking back, I'm satisfied with how it turned out. Ironic that a statement like that relates to a product released unfinished, but life is darkly comedic at times. If you're interested in trying Daraku Tenshi out for yourself, the game is easily accessible on Fightcade with rollback netcode. Plus, it's completely free, so you might as well give it a shot. With how many years have passed since its release, we may never enter Eden and witness the Fallen Angels again, but for what it's worth, the true die-hard fans who have spent countless hours grinding sets and discovering glitches have expressed their love for this wonderful world. I know it, you know it, and Kodama knows it too. Never forget the Fallen Angels.
Yo